Hey guys, what's up? We're back. We're back with another episode of Reborn Radio. Last week we were kind of talking a little bit about the Crusades, and we just kind of wanted to keep moving with that because we had some good material for you guys. So, yeah, I'm just going to dive right in, guys. Andy was talking about, that's how we drop it. I'm going to drop some dope Templar memes too, because those make all of this worth it. Like, I am the Templar memes. I love the
Hashish much?
Yes, I love the one where it's like there's a picture of a Crusader and he says, "Good heavens, look at the time!" and every time on the clock says Crusade.
Hey, can I ask before we get started? Can I ask a really dumb question, because I actually legitimately don't know what this means? Okay. Andy, what does the catchphrase for the Crusades is Deus Vult? Well, I know what Deus means. I took 1 year of Latin. Okay, what does Deus Vult mean?
God wills it.
Okay, sorry. I just had this mental concept of my dear papist friends who do not embrace the sovereignty of God saying God wills it. That is rich. Anyways, let's go right into it.
That just made all your jokes that much better, didn't it, Andrew?
I don't need to say anything else. I ripped Catholicism. I'm done. All Andrew right. Out. Mic drop. Bam.
You can sit out for the rest of the podcast.
I am. I'm going to put my feet on my desk right now.
Okay, we're going to let Andy talk, because Andy was talking, and I interrupted him, so I want him to keep talking. So so basically we left off, the Crusades were unbelievably expensive for a Christian noble to just drop everything because a pope said so and go head off with a massive army to Jerusalem. So the argument that the Christians were bloody warlords that just wanted to conquer an entire area doesn't make a lot of sense. If you are a rich and prosperous lord and you see a country way, way over there that's really expensive to travel to, and you may or may not win, that's a horrible business deal. But anyway.
It is. And there were some crusading families that were ruined by it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
No one ever talks about that. Like, you will not hear that. You go to a secular university and go take medieval history. You're not going to hear about the Christians who were ruined by the Crusades.
Right. It's true. But yeah,
their motivation was purely spiritual. Yeah. And while their theology is very different from the way we as evangelicals would believe today,
right?
They didn't have the scriptures for themselves. That was told to them, or that their teaching came to them from a priest. Right, and so they were told that if they went on a crusade, that they would get a plenary indulgence, that their sins would be forgiven. And the soldier class of this period was considered to be in spiritual trouble. It was not good to be a soldier in early Christianity. It was believed that you were going to hell.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Because blood was on your hands, and this was a way
to make the blood righteous.
Yes, it was a way for warriors to find redemption. So that was a very powerful motivation for a lot of Christian soldiers who felt they didn't really have a very good chance of getting into heaven because of what their role in society was.
Yeah.
The best chance you had in medieval Catholicism to get to heaven was be a monk, basically.
Interesting. Now, because I actually have a question on that. I remember when I was studying this period of time when I was in high school, I remember we talked actually quite a bit about Pope Urban II. And one of the things that, I later checked this out and did some very minimal research. I want to be very careful about what I say about this. But was it true that Pope Urban basically said, hey, if you fight in the Crusades, we can guarantee you a ticket into heaven? Would that be an accurate statement concerning Pope Urban II?
I'm not 100% clear, but I have heard that there were promises of salvation for people going on crusade. What I don't understand is if that could be revoked by actions after the fact, right. Or if that was set in stone. I'm unclear on that.
Yeah, and that's where I'm just going to remind our audience, friends, as Dr. White often says, theology matters. Because, who knows? Maybe the Pope after that can revoke it. But, that if you think about it, and like I said, I don't want to go too far on this line of reasoning because I have not triple verified it, and that makes me a little bit uncomfortable. At the same time, we're talking about how there wasn't a lot to gain for the soldier class, and even it sounds like from the noble class in fighting these wars, except that the surety of stopping the Ottoman offensive. But at the same time, that would be a great way to raise a lot of troops by saying, "Hey, you fight in the Crusades, and we get you into heaven."
Mm-hmm.
Also, really quick, I know for a fact that Urban II, there was Urban II, a speech at the Council of Clermont in 1095.
Nice.
That was recorded, and this is an exact quote
Yes.
from Urban II. He said, "All who die by the way, whether by land or by sea, or in battle against the pagans, shall receive immediate remission of sins. This I grant them through the power of God with which I am invested." So there you go.
And all of us go.
Right, the remission of sins, but I don't understand if that holds. Like if they sin majorly after the Crusades, if that's revoked, or if that stands regardless, I don't know.
But clearly
I don't understand
today,
all of Catholic theology.
Right? Yeah, and those pragmatic details
they don't either.
Right. Yeah, exactly. They have their whole catechism. They don't. But even then, though, but you see here there is at least a pope trying to be a motivator to move people using false doctrine to motivate them to go to war. So you have
Absolutely.
that. I'm sorry, that's on the Catholics' hands. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I find the whole works thing really sad. It's like giving people hope of salvation by going to war, basically, and
holding the carrot out in front of them.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for those who weren't. Especially for those who put their hope and faith in that. By my own hands, by this sword, by me walking into the Holy Land, because really that's all you had to gain. From what you're telling me, Andy, that's the most you had to gain. Maybe some notoriety if you came home as a warlord champion, like maybe King Richard the Lionheart did. But at the same time, you didn't come back a vastly wealthy man when you went to the Crusades. That's a falsehood that has been imprinted upon the story of the Crusades.
No, and in fact, Professor Thomas F. Madden, I believe it was in his Concise History of the Crusades that he said this, pointed out that the Crusaders' focus was storing up treasure in heaven.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Now, I do want to bring up one other point, though. People also say, though, that the Templars got rich during and after the Crusades. Like, they were incredibly prosperous. They became bankers, I know, almost to the point where they were persecuted. How does that tie in? Like, people aren't going to say, "Oh, but clearly look at the Templars; they were rich." So obviously, the Crusades made people rich. Right.
Well, you have to think of who the Templars actually were. They were actually a clerical organization. Right. These are monks. They have taken vows of poverty, and their sole mission in life was to protect the Holy Land, protect the pilgrims that were going to the Holy Land. Now that's something, a major issue I think we also need to discuss because it ties into the banking thing. Pilgrimages were a big deal in the Middle Ages. You got years knocked off of purgatory if you made it to certain holy sites.
Heck of a deal.
Yes, and the problem was in the Holy Land, you were not safe as a pilgrim. Well, arguably not anywhere in medieval Europe, but once you got to the Holy Land, you could be killed or enslaved by some of the locals. And the banking system that the Templars set up was designed to prevent pilgrims from getting robbed.
It was a money transport.
Yes, it was. So someone who wants to travel to the Holy Land could go up to a Templar bank in Europe, and they're given a certificate. They go sail across the sea, and then they arrive at the Holy Land, and then they go to another Templar bank, and they show the certificate, and they get their money back.
Checks. Basically writing checks to themselves.
Exactly, and it was the foundation of the modern banking system. Yes. Templar ships. I think Michael Haag wrote about this. How Templar ships were considered to be more reliable mode of transportation. Italians had a bad habit of selling you into slavery.
Whoops.
Yeah.
Catholic much.
Hashtag papism.
Sorry. Yeah, hashtag. Sorry, I couldn't resist. I saw that opening and I took it.
Bam!
Not to say that was all the Italians, but
Yeah,
enough of them did it.
My ancestors, the Swedes, we Vikings did a little bit of that as well.
That's true. My people.
Yeah.
When you get to the 17 and 1800s, where the English Empire kind of just ruled everything, and we did.
So basically, humanity's sinful, and all of our ancestors have a checkered past. Hey, big whoop, big surprise. That's awful.
Yeah.
Hey,
at least the Vikings were like open about it. The Italians are like, "Oh, you want a passage to the Holy Land? Sure. Oh, we're not. We didn't tell you about that little transportation deal we had."
Transportation fees.
And the Vikings were basically like, they just show up at your house and say, "Look, here's how it's going down. I own you now." I mean, we were straight up honest about what was going down.
Yeah.
You are now.
Yes.
There was no double dealing there. The Vikings just showed up and were like, "Guess what? You lose."
We're good at that. But Andy, so I actually have a question as well concerning the Crusades. So, we talk a lot when we think about the Crusades. I think a lot of people think about some of the earlier Crusades, the first Crusades. And another crusade that I want to, if we have time, I'd like to talk about too is, we hear a lot about the Children's Crusade. But the Crusades happened over a pretty large expansion of time, right? I mean, between the first Crusade and the last Crusade, there was a big chunk of time, wasn't there?
To the Holy Land or the Crusades in general?
The Crusades in general.
There's a difference. Okay, yes. So the first Crusade was actually the first Crusade. That one did go to the Holy Land. There was fighting over in Spain. But I don't believe it was really sanctioned as like a crusade movement until after the first Crusade. After that, yeah, it did get sanctioned in Spain. That became known as the Reconquista, and that would last all the way into the 1400s.
And
wow.
What was the purpose of that again?
The reconquest of Spain from the Moors. So we talked in the last episode about how the Moors took over Spain and then invaded France. Well, this was the pushback where Spanish Christians were trying to reclaim the peninsula, and that is chaotic because there were multiple Christian kingdoms, not always at peace with each other.
And just to clarify, the Moors being a massive Islamic war machine of the High Middle Ages.
They were a group of people that had converted to Islam. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So
they pushed up from Africa.
I mean, that's another myth as well, isn't it? I mean, here's what we would hear from academia today, that the mean Templars and the mean Catholics and the mean Christians went down to Israel and found these nice, friendly people who would never, ever harm anybody and said, "Hey, we don't like you," and punked them.
No, they were killing Byzantines, and they were also killing each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And
so these are not exactly angels. These who were. I mean, that's another question I had. I always assume, based on where the Holy Land is, even in early history, like the First Crusade, for some reason I assume it's the Ottoman Turks. And I know that's false. Who were, for the most part, the Holy League Christians fighting against?
The Holy League Christians, the 1500s?
No, my bad, not the Holy League.
What people group lived in Israel in this time?
Yeah, that's the question I meant to ask. Thanks, Alex. I was being an idiot.
No, right. Like, what was the name? Were they the Turks? Were they the Saracens? Who lived in Israel?
The Muslim or the Christians that were living there? Oh, right. Well, first it was the Arabs, and then the Seljuk Turks came in.
But wasn't which one was the Saracens? Were they they're kind of where Jordan is, aren't they? Basically in that area. Or am I thinking of someone entirely different?
Or is that just a term? Or the Saracens like a term that the Christians use to describe the people group in general down there?
That might be it.
I'm not sure.
I thought it was a people group.
It seemed kind of a generic term, based in my experience.
I don't know.
So basically, yeah, we don't know. We ain't got that. We ain't know nothing about that.
Anyways, the point being, what was the point?
The point is that these people were not just sitting around, with like this was not a non-militaristic society. The Seljuk Turks. These were warring people just as much, if at all, as Europe was, right?
Yes, and in fact, Saladin himself spent as much or more time fighting other Muslim factions as he did the Christians. And his excuse was that he wanted to create a unified front against the Christians. He wanted to unite the Holy Land and present a better, more organized front against the Christians. Now, whether that was just a justification or if he was actually genuine, I mean, that's up for debate.
Right.
We'll probably never know that till the end of time.
Yep, it's true.
But yeah, it's and also too, like, I'm pretty sure. So in the late 600 AD, you can back me up on this, Andy. Correct me if I'm wrong. Late 600s, early 700s. Once the Islamic warlords, which I believe were, so what happened. So what I understand is the direct disciples of Muhammad, basically his disciples, not like Christ had his disciples, but the people directly after Muhammad were largely the warlords that took over most of the central Middle Eastern area, or were at least a large part of that. And once they got there, what were the rules specifically for what happened when you conquered Christian peoples that were already residing in those areas? Because those areas were still very Christian, right, before the Muslims came.
Mm-hmm. Right. So some of the defenders of say, the Muslim point of view in the Crusades, they would point out to how in some places Christians seem to be living peaceful, or to be in peaceful coexistence with the Muslims.
Yeah.
Mm.
But what they don't talk about is the system of dimitude.
Yeah. Written by the Quran, correct? If I'm correct.
Yes, and right, and technically Christians are considered people of the book, but if you are not a follower of Islam proper, you still have to be subject to the rules of dimitude, and that meant that you had to pay a special tax. I think it was called the jizya, and their large churches were taken away. It turned into mosques. They were allowed to have some smaller churches, but they were not allowed to renovate them. And this is kind of an interesting look at how this was sort of repeated with the Jews later in Nazi Germany. You had to wear special clothing as a Christian.
Designate you.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
So they weren't like openly being murdered, but they were definitely second-class citizens.
Right.
Interesting.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah. And so, yeah.
So basically, it would be safe to say that, overall, and I know the Crusades are a broad term, and I was just doing some research on my own. The Crusades were, especially if you start talking about there were Northern Europe Crusades. We could talk about the Livonian Order. There's a lot that went down the Crusades, but for our purposes here, talking specifically about the Crusades that were designed to be, like you said, Andy, an offensive defensive against a rapidly expanding ideology of Islam for the most part. And I think this is something that would not sell well, what I'm about to say right now. And this is something that would be considered, I think, highly offensive. And you guys can slap me if you want, but I would stand by this. There are superior cultures in the world. There are cultures that are superior over others. Now, I'm not saying that we should do some sort of forced culture sterilization of the bad ones, but at the same time, I would just argue that take a look at the areas of the world that were conquered by the Muslims, by the forces of Islam, compared to, I'm going to call it Western civilization, where Christianity, the Judeo-Christian worldview, thrived and flourished, specifically after the Reformation, the Protestant worldview. And there is a huge difference today, what we see. Look at the poverty that exists, maybe minus the United Arab Emirates, which from an Islamic perspective is a pretty moderate country. But look at the poverty that exists in the world of Islam today versus the flourishing of where the Judeo-Christian worldview exists. It tells a fascinating story.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. I think I've actually wanted to do some serious research on how religion has influenced actual civilizations, actual entire nations and countries, and the demographics of those countries. And yeah, because there are cultures, it's like you see, this is going to be unpopular, but you know what? We're unpopular. So
Yeah, we suck.
Yeah, you see a lot. I remember learning when I was reading. This is striking. I remember when I was reading about Hinduism and Buddhism in countries in the Orient, India, some part, Nepal, and some parts of, just all the Orient really, and Thailand. That's what I was trying to say. But where Eastern religions are a big deal, and they're big believers in karma, right? And it's interesting. Those countries are still very poverty-stricken. They're overflowing with people that they can't feed. It's a very poor country. We're constantly, as Christians, you hear I'm sure your church in some way or another has supported a mission to India at some level. Like, I know we're sending, like, my church is like 3 people going to India. India is just so poverty-stricken. And what's interesting is that people coming back from those missions and people very familiar with Hinduism that I have learned from have said they have no concept of mercy or grace. Like, they don't understand charity per se. And the reason for that is karma. Is because if karma has dictated that you are reincarnated as a poor individual, you deserve that. If karma has dictated that you were reincarnated at a lower class of, because they still have a very strict class system. If you were reincarnated on a lower class or experiencing suffering on some level, that's just karma taking its effects. And you are interfering with karma by helping them on any level. If you give to a poor person, you're screwing around with karma, and you can't do that. You're going to screw up your karma that way.
That's fascinating. And, one of the things that Andy mentioned, we all were talking about kind of before the show, is we were kind of, daydreaming the what if situation. So imagine that there isn't, an Islamic spread across Northern Europe. That doesn't happen. Imagine the difference that would exist in Africa today. I think it would be safe to assume that Africa, as far as a continent goes, probably one of the poorest continents, if not the poorest continent, out of all of them by far. And, you were just saying, Alex, there's a lot of churches that have supported missionaries to India. And I would guess, actually, there's probably even more churches that have supported missionaries to Africa. Yeah. I mean, my home church supports a couple of missionaries over in Zambia. I know that Bodhi Bakum, a great Bible teacher that all of us respect, he's over. I believe he's the president of a seminary over in Lusaka, Zambia, and helping train Bible teachers over there. Yeah, it's awesome. But think about the spread of Islam doesn't happen. Imagine if the followers of Augustine, who I'm going to throw in here, is a Protestant hero and is been falsely proclaimed as a Catholic hero. Yeah, that's bogus. But the Protestant hero Augustine, great man of God, his followers, what if they had gone south and spread the gospel into Southern Africa, Middle Africa, instead of Islam basically being, for the most part, in North Africa, the wall that doesn't allow anything to go south of it? That for the most part, slowly over many, many years, I know they're still there today, but definitely Islam had a very negative effect upon what we would call the Coptic Christians today. They're still having a very negative effect right now. ISIS is trying to eliminate completely any remnants of Coptic Christianity whatsoever. So just imagine the difference. I mean, and I think it is important that we talk about this. It's very unpopular because we live in a society and in a country that believes in liberty. And I'm a liberty-loving individual. If you want to practice the religion of Islam, I'm fine with that. If you want to have a mosque, I'm fine with that. I believe in your right to do that. The moment that I take issue is when you decide you want to blow stuff up. And let's get real. There's one religion in the world today that's going around blowing stuff up, and it's not Christianity. I'm sorry. So the reality of it is I'm okay with you practicing your Islamic beliefs up until the point where you're going to violate the liberty of another person. Because I believe that the Christian worldview is correct. And I think, like I said earlier, take a look around the world. The countries where the people have embraced a Christian worldview, specifically a Protestant Christian worldview, are the countries that we would consider to be successful countries. Europe, the United States, New Zealand, Australia. The countries that have not embraced the Judeo-Christian worldview are the countries that make up the concept of a third world country. That is where poverty exists.
Well, another thing too, if you go back to Africa, with the slave trade in the late Renaissance, would that have even occurred had Islam penetrated the African continent?
Right. Yeah. There
Because like one of the justifications, I believe, with like say the Portuguese and stuff was they weren't Christians over there. So and they were piggybacking off of a slave trade that was already existing with the Muslims. So had Islam not penetrated Africa, that might have either been reduced or non-existent.
Wow.
One of the most pressing things that I heard Michael Hagen, my Christian church history professor, point out, and he was emotionally sad when he said this. He said an entire Christian sub-civilization was wiped out in early AD 700 in Africa. A whole like subcontinent civilization was completely wiped off the face of the earth, and we'll never recover that.
Yeah, can you imagine the history that we lost with that? When the Moors came in, I can only imagine the destruction that was done to tons of maybe not original text, but early texts that existed in, say, like Alexandria, which was a center of culture during the Roman era. I mean, we lost a lot due to the Islamic onslaught. And I'm going to say, I mean, this is my honest perspective, especially after hearing Andy talk, and I've heard him talk about this several different times. Is my overall perspective is, the Crusades were bloody. War is always bloody. War is terrible across the board. I don't care if it's World War II or the Crusades. War is a product of sin in this world, and it's awful. It's always going to be awful. And you better believe, some of the Crusaders, were they brutal? Absolutely. Were people on the other side brutal? Absolutely. Two wrongs don't make a right. It was wrong across the whole. But at the same time, thank God for the Crusades. Thank God that the Islamic invasion did not penetrate into Western civilization. Thank God that for raising up people like Charles Martel, that with his Frankish forces stopped on the other side of Europe, Islam sweeping into the country. I am grateful for these things that God protected, as he always has promised to do. God protected a remnant so that the reality of Christianity would not be swept off the face of the earth.
Yeah. That's another really important point you brought up was the atrocities committed during the Crusades. For one thing, they're disproportionate.
Why am I not surprised?
on the different sides, yes. One of the biggest examples that scholars will use to attack the Christian role in the Crusades was the siege of Jerusalem. But what is often not said is that what went down was actually traditional within the rules of warfare at the time. If a city did not surrender, it was understood that the army would come in and kill like everyone.
Yeah, the Black Flag.
If you surrendered, that wasn't supposed to happen.
Right. You were given your opportunity to surrender, and if you didn't abide by it, you're going to be wiped out.
Correct. And people have also misinterpreted one of the primary sources that talked about people riding up to the bridles and blood. That was a reference to an end time scenario, and they took it literally. It was a metaphor. And I've actually been to Jerusalem. I've been to Jerusalem. It's a big place. You're not going to kill so many people that it's going to run that high with blood in the area. I'm sorry. But on the other hand, people will talk about how chivalrous Saladin was.
Right.
When he was attacking the Jerusalem, he actually intended to kill everyone, kill or enslave everyone. Now there was a knight named Balian de Ibelin. He was not a blacksmith. I don't care what Kingdom of Heaven tells you. He did not marry Sibylla.
That movie. It took me a second. Yeah, that was
yes.
It was a long time ago.
I love that movie. It's not accurate?
No, it is not at all historically accurate. It's fun to watch, but
What?
no, no. But he saved the city for the most part by telling Saladin, he says, like, okay, if you're gonna actually keep on with your attack on the city, we're going to destroy every holy site we currently occupy right now.
Wow.
And Saladin took him seriously, but he didn't really follow those same rules of war when he took over. He actually had the whole population ransom themselves. And there were a great many people who could not afford the ransom, and so they were enslaved.
Wow.
Balian, for his own part, paid for as many people as he could out of his pocket.
Wow.
Yes.
That's incredible. Wow. Well,
Yeah.
hey, guys, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Andy, it has been absolutely fantastic to have you on Reborn Radio. We are definitely going to have to bring you back again, man. I mean, I feel like we could talk about this topic for, we could do 10 episodes easily.
This is not even the tip of the iceberg.
Right. So I would encourage everyone who are listening right now, go do some research on the Crusades. Take a look at what both sides have to say, because across the board, and I'm sure we'll get into this later in more episodes, across the board, the modern teachers of academia and history definitely have an agenda they're trying to drive. It's a very much an anti-Christian agenda, and so it wouldn't be surprising that they would be absolutely opposed to the Crusades, but there's a different story to tell. Thanks so much for tuning in to Reborn Radio. Make sure to check us out on Twitter and Facebook. In addition, subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's a lot of good stuff on YouTube of a bunch of us and Alex and I's friends goofing off, and we actually have some pretty surprisingly intellectual discussions while we're beating the smack out of each other on Brawlhalla. Sometimes it does happen. It gets real sometimes. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. God bless, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone.